I think that joy and pain, in the words of Rob Bass, are very tightly linked. And I think one is a release for the other. The day that John Dunsworth passed away, who was Mr. Leahy on Trailer Park Boys and a good friend and someone I looked up to and cared about a lot, Jeremy and I were on our book launch. And I was suddenly doing these morning shows on the morning after he had passed away, and people were asking repeatedly, what are you thinking about John this morning? What are your thoughts? Sorry to hear that you lost this person. Tell us about him. It was so heavy. And in the weirdest way, it feels good to be able to sit in it as it's happening and feel it instead of pretend it's not happening. There's no way around it. Got to go through it. So then Jeremy and I went to do this funny thing for CBC radio, and we were weeping with laughter. And it's not that anything that was happening was so funny. I think we just had to lance the boil of tension and coat ourselves with the sweet sebum of a page turn, because it's like when it pours and then the sun comes out. Like, not those emotions are so heightened, they can't be sustained. And I think we're wired physiologically to relieve ourselves from the weight.
And welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's the channel here speaking as your host. I want to thank the listener for their auditory companionship and all their support, all of your support for the last almost 3 years. We've been at it since May 2020, and we ain't stopping. I want to ask you as well, if you haven't, please already share, family, friends, rate it. And if you're so inclined, our regular listeners have known for a while, for the last few months, that we're also a charity. So if you want to donate to the cause, to the mission of what we are, exploring the what ifs and the why nots, by all means, just go to our website, behindgreatness.org. You can see everything there. Today, we're joined by somebody from the East Coast of Canada. His name is Jonathan Torrens. He's worked in comedy for 30 years and has been nominated for the Canadian Screen Awards as director, producer, writer, actor, and host, and has also won a few. Some of the listeners here might remember him or might remember his character, J-Roc, that he played, is now on Netflix. Trailer Park Boys, that's what I'm referring to, where he's also directed and written a bunch of episodes as well. He has performed in pieces like Letterkenny and Hulu, Shoresy, also on Hulu, on CBC sitcom Dr. D as Robert Cheeley, 8 seasons there. Spike's TV, The Joe Schmo Show as Gerald, the gotta be gay guy, and on and on and on. And we'll put Jonathan's bio as well in the show notes. He's also very multi-talented, and we'll talk about the Swiss Army knife in a few minutes. He's also part of the Taggart and Torrens podcast show, which has had more than 4 million downloads and has won a Canadian Comedy Award for Best Audio Show. It's also spawned a best-selling book called Canadianity. With his partner, Sylvia Burns, they also have a production company, Canadian Content Studios, where they've produced web series. He also has a rental company, Rolling Production Rentals, also has a t-shirt line, filmprints.ca, which benefits the Actors Fund of Canada's new Navigator program, of which helps provide mental health support to anyone working in the arts. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
And we're out of time. This was fun. Thank you.
It was fantastic.
When you said send a bio over, I didn't know you would read the entire thing in the same way that Happy Birthday can feel like the longest song on the planet Earth when you are the center of attention in that way. It's very uncomfortable to sit and hear your bio read back to you.
My apologies. We should have done this in like 3 parts, but whatever. We got it all done.
It's one of those, it's fundamentally, as a Canadian, the idea of self-promoting is so not innate to us. It feels very uncomfortable. And I have a theory that the further east you go in Canada, the less okay it is to be self-promoting, because we grow up here with the idea that self-confidence and arrogance are synonymous.
Yes.
So to accept a compliment even is showing off. And my friend Sherry, who's from Newfoundland, said if someone says, I like your shirt, and you say anything less than I found it in a dumpster, you're showing off. So I had to endure you reading my accomplishments. It's taken a long time to get comfortable with them, and yet they're true.
Well, just to finish off on that, you did cover your ears, put it on mute, and sing la 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 while I was reading it, but the listener didn't. It's
true.
Yeah. So you mentioned, let's go right into it. Self-deprecation. When we were talking about last time we chatted, we were talking about your experience in LA because you decided you wanted to try. You wanted to throw your hat in the ring there, and you said one of the main differences is that. Yes, not to repeat your words here, but Canadians are much more self-deprecating than Americans. But when Canadians receive a compliment, we go through the rigmarole that you had just described, and Americans just say thank you.
I had a friend tell me a compliment is like a gift. When you give your aunt a sweater for Christmas, you don't want her to say, oh, I've put on a few pounds, or robin's egg blue is not my color. You just want her to say thanks. And it's really required a fair amount of work in my life to be able to say thanks when someone pays me a compliment, because why would you crash the bus and make it weird? Just accept it. And your confidence is, in fact, confidence instilling, as long as you're also willing to own all the things you don't know. But it's okay to be okay at some things in the world. And especially, I guess, as an actor, when you're effectively a traveling salesperson and the product you're selling is yourself, it sends a confusing message when at the same time in auditions, I would say, oh, sorry, I'm almost finished, or bear with me, or I'm stinking up the room. People in America are like, what? It's confounding.
Well, now our American listeners can finish their snooze, because I think this is just throwing them off, maybe bored them, maybe they're asleep.
Well, this is what I would like to say about Americans as far as Canadians are concerned. The misconception we have growing up. I think sometimes we think Americans are rude because they communicate directly, or because they can't name all the provinces. I was actually surprised and delighted to go to America and understand what people were trying to say. Because if you're standing in front of a door, they'll say, can you move? Oh, sure. Versus in my house, I grew up, my dad was British. If the pepper was in front of me at the other end of the table, he would say to me, would you like some pepper? Because I was supposed to say, no, thank you. Would you? Yes, please. The most indirect, roundabout way of communicating. So it saves a lot of time and confusion to communicate directly the way Americans do, who are, it should be said, extremely friendly people.
Well, I completely agree with you. Let me add my thoughts there and ask it as a question. When you were spending the time figuring out how to get somebody to do something or say something, like your British dad, I'm not picking on your dad, but it is like your British dad, versus just getting it over with so you can move on with exploring ideas and exploring the what ifs. Isn't that freeing?
It is in some ways, because there's less room for misinterpretation and miscommunication, and there's less speculation, I guess. It's very clear. So on the upside, when I was living in Los Angeles as a working actor or trying to be working TV host, I'd be sitting in a room with a bunch of buff dudes, and the casting director would come in and say, you guys will read for the hunks. And then she'd look at me and say, you'll read for the perv next door, the weird guy in the store in the lobby of the office building, the gay best friend, the nerdy intern. So they like to be able to categorize people in the same way, whereas in Canada, you can't. You have to do more than one thing in order to make a living in the arts. The other difference is, in the States, it's okay to have fame as a goal. What do you want to do? I want to be famous, in a way that we Canadians can't really comprehend because we don't have that stratosphere of stardom. So in the States, in Canada, if people do this for a living, there's a good chance that superstardom is not what's motivating them. So I had to categorize myself in the States. At the time, they wanted to know, are you David Schwimmer? Are you a sitcom actor? Or are you Ryan Seacrest? Are you a television host? Because you can't be both. And in Canada, not only can you kind of have to be.
Well, so I mentioned the Swiss Army knife, the Swiss Army knife metaphor that you brought up to me in the last conversation. That's something that you learned. Is that something that you learned right off the bat, that you were told that possibly would be a better skill set, or is that something that you learned going through the business? And what does that mean?
So sort of something that I've learned by out of necessity. The Swiss Army knife approach, in my case, means I have an implement for just about every situation in my business. I have directed a bit, I've produced a little, I've written, I can act-ish, I can host, kind of. All the shows that I've worked on have kind of been hybrids. Trailer Park Boys was a fake mockumentary. I had a talk show called Jonavision that had sketches, and sometimes it was a game show. So I'm at home and have a couple of tricks in just about every setting. But imagine in this country if I had said, no, I am strictly a television game show host. I wouldn't be able to make a living or feed my family. But more so in my case, I think I wouldn't be satisfied because I'm always curious to take on new and different kicks just to see.
When you were young and you had the opportunity to go to university to study broadcast and media, you were at the university, for non-Canadian listeners, Ryerson in Toronto. You're from the East Coast, and Toronto's quite a ways to go. And you said the registrar, she told you, because you had already worked you had already been working for a couple of years, is that right? In media by that time?
Yeah. I started at 15 at CBC on a show called Street Sense.
And she asked you why? Like, because you wanted to enroll? She said, why? You're already in the business. Do you want to recall what exactly she said to you? Do you remember what you shared with me?
Yeah. I was graduating from high school, barely. I'd been working at CBC for a couple of years, but had discovered, as a nosy kid from Prince Edward Island, I found when I traveled somewhere with a TV camera, people would tell me things that they would never tell their closest confidant. And that was very satisfying. I liked going to Winnipeg to do a story about illegal curves and hockey sticks. For a teenage kid, this was an incredible job. I got to impersonate Don Cherry one week and create an original character the next week. I got to be myself on camera, travel. So I knew quite quickly that this is what I wanted to do for a living. And I contacted the registrar at Ryerson. They had a great radio and television arts program, and said, I'd like to come and study. And she said, why? You're already working in the business. And I was like, yeah. And so I want to learn. Her argument was, you're already doing what a lot of our graduates would like to do. If I was you, I would just take on extra work, learn to take criticism, learn people's names, say please and thank you, absorb every aspect of that experience you possibly can. And then in the event that, the wheels come off the bus, or you need to someday, you could always revisit going to school then. But for now, let it ride. And that was wonderful advice. So
you said two things, that she also said to you, you're doing it by doing it. Which makes sense. And you said your TV school was the actual school that you needed in retrospect.
Yeah. And it was such a good lesson, because a lot of the suggestions she made were kind of kindergarten lessons. Mm-hmm. Be on time, say please and thank you, learn people's names. Those simple, basic social graces have, I'm sure, resulted in me being hired by people, or having a good reputation. Those are really simple, important things. And I try to instill those in my daughters too, the subject of taking criticism with a smile on your face, instead of getting your back up.
It's
My daughter
coachability.
used to say of her, yeah,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
my daughter used to say of her dance teacher, she's correcting you. She's correcting me. And I would say, no, she's teaching you. And if you can give yourself over to that and just let it happen, it's one of life's great shortcuts.
This is where I have a problem. I have a problem with two things in general. One is our school system and how it trains us to succeed and move forward. So it judges us against a templated answer system. So you have to hit that answer system and you have to play well in that answer system. Otherwise, you will be judged as not okay or as less than. And then Western culture. I mean, I think we've lost our way a little bit. Not that I'm an anarchist. I mean, I'm a proud North American, but there is. We've had Natalie Sudman on the podcast, and she's an artist, and she's treated her career and her jobs as fuel to help her do her art. So she would take odd jobs in Antarctica for the experience in order to draw what she saw in Antarctica. Beautiful stuff.
Love it.
One piece of advice she became, she not inherited, how would I say? She took on a lot of wisdom after she had a near-death experience. And she laughed a lot. She talked about the divinity of, we should talk about this, the divinity of humor. But the reason why I bring her up is because she said there's a problem here in Western society that we have is that we're afraid to fail. So every time we change direction or change course or try something new, we always feel like we need to be at the top of the hill as soon as we try it. We don't like to start from the bottom again. I think because we've taught our kids this, I say we, like society, West Society has taught our kids that we need to go through this school system. We need to achieve this, go to the next, have this, have the family, have this. So by the time you're 30, you're settled, you have a job, and we have to worry about you. You take out play, like the importance of play and exploration. That's why we like to have artists on the podcast. I don't know. I've said a lot here, but
boredom. All the great creativity that comes from being bored, and kids aren't bored because they have devices in their hands. I have a lot of feelings about this, though I'm not a teacher. I did play one on TV. My sister-in-law is a teacher, and she's teaching grade 4 to about 9 different learning levels. Wow. And she's a wonderful teacher and dedicated and inundated and overwhelmed and surviving. Part of the problem societally, I think, is that we've taken consequences away, and you win some, you lose some, and all these simple but important lessons that we learned as kids that have served us in the world. So my kids don't very often have deadlines with homework. If they do, they're sort of Nerf deadlines that can come and go with no real consequences or stakes. Some sporting events for kids, 12 and under, they don't keep score anymore. And I think you win some, you lose some is one of the great lessons in the world. So we've been trying to come up with ways to instill deadlines in our kids' lives so that when they show up for work, their boss isn't going to just shrug their shoulders if they don't show up on time or if they don't get their work done. I think people always say, you must be such a fun dad. And I'd like to think I am, but I also am well aware that I'm their father, not their friend. And I think kids need boundaries and in fact are comforted by them. So we don't expect an outrageous amount from them, but we do have expectations. And they meet them. They're wonderful kids and a great hang. But it's a strange time to be a teacher and strange time to be a parent. So I don't feel like the outcome of our education system is ideal, but I have tremendous sympathy for teachers who I know work so hard and have their plates overflowing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a weird, I think you used the word weird. It's a weird time to be a teacher, because I think most teachers who like doing what they're doing, who actually treat their jobs as vocations, those ones are the inspiring ones because they understand, I think they understand more why creativity and celebrating creative thought and play is important in the classroom. But the classroom is a rigid place. And as a parent, here are my thoughts. You tell me. As a parent, I want my boys, so I have two boys. I want my boys to be accountable. Like I want them to be accountable to themselves first, and then to family, society, and their own decisions. But I also want them to explore and not be fearful of failing. And I grew up where those two things were not even mentioned in the first breath. Like it was tough to balance both of those. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out myself. I don't know. Again, rambling, but what do you think?
I know. I agree wholeheartedly. There's part of me that feels like the best experiences we've had as far as education goes is when we've taken the girls out of school and traveled to places where life is different than it is for us at home. They can learn history and geography and math and English and all of those things. I guess it depends on what you believe is the school's responsibility versus what is the parent's responsibility. I read about a disturbing trend in corporate America where people are taking a parent to job interviews.
That's terrible.
I have friends who are GMs of junior hockey teams who say we are raising kids who are unaware and unable to make decisions for themselves. And it manifests in life and it manifests on the ice. Puck's going in the corner and they're looking at the bench like, what should I do? So I know it was a different time, but I remember I wasn't 10 and my mother gave me $1,000 cash and told me to go deposit it at the bank. And I said, how do I do that? And she said, well, ask when you get there. So we're probably too far to the other end of the pendulum now, but I'm very thankful that I'm pretty much able to figure out a solution to most of the challenges that arise because I was always challenged to do that.
Which is interesting to me, going back to your LA experience, because you did say you wanted to go to LA. You were already established here. You were in your late 20s when you went, is that right? Or 30?
Yeah.
Okay. You had already...
Yes, I turned 30 and I'd been working at CBC for 15 years.
There you go. So
it was time to see what else was out there.
Yeah. So you used the two words, what if? You were curious. You wanted to see the what if. And then you had a realization that you shared with me about the casino dentist.
Yes, I was living in LA and it wasn't as anything as I thought it would be. My entire sense of the city was from the montage in Pretty Woman where Richard Gere is driving a Standard around the block of the Beverly Hills Hotel. Yeah. I assumed dogs had diamond collars. Everyone had implants. Every waiter was a would-be actor. I didn't expect it would be a city where people just happened to live. So it wasn't as glamorous. It wasn't as sexy. It wasn't as shiny. But what I also didn't expect is I made friends for life. I did work. People who are ambitious and motivated and curious. All the other what-ifers were there. So I really liked it. But the problem was it was never home. And I was auditioning for things that the only thing worse than not getting it would be getting it and having to show up at work doing something soul-sucking. I often use America's Cutest Puppy as an example. I auditioned to host a show for Animal Planet, which was like a reality show for dogs. Like, really, is this what I meant when I came here? So I auditioned for this terrible casino commercial in Burbank, and it took an hour and a half to drive there from Venice, where I lived. And you get into this weird mindset where you think, only took an hour and a half. That's not bad. And you start doing the math on the number of hours that you've spent in the car. And I called my mom, who's back in Halifax, and just to chit chat and put the time in on the highway, and asked what she was up to. And she said, I'm going to the dentist. And she sounded a little blue. I said, oh, how do you feel about that? And she said, well, she's kind of scared to go. And I thought, do I want to be the guy that books a casino commercial, or do I want to be the guy that was around to take his mom to the dentist because she was scared to go? And it was an epiphany that stopped me in my tracks instantly. And when put like that, there was no question. I would much rather that be my legacy than I booked an under 5 on Moesha.
I think in knowing a little bit more about your story through you, obviously, and then obviously seeing some of your artistic output over the years, and now talking about it here. I was going to ask you a question earlier, and I decided to put it off. Maybe we'll talk about it now. You have a superpower. You didn't call it a superpower. I'm calling it that. And what do we call it here? The read the room gene.
Mm.
And that's I find in trying to understand your story a little bit and your philosophy a little bit. I find that that's what is the wrap around everything you do. Is that accurate, or am I off?
No, it's a nice compliment. I definitely think the older I get, EQ, emotional intelligence, is more valuable than IQ. IQ, I mean, you have or you don't, but you can do things to bolster your IQ. You either have an awareness or you don't. And I guess as a performer, it served me because I can chameleon myself into most groups of people and feel at home and contribute. But it's also served me from a business standpoint for the same reason, because I can morph and adapt. There aren't many places I feel like I don't belong here. There are places I would choose to spend my time more. I live in the country. My day-to-day existence has very little to do with what I do for a living. My wife is happy for me that I enjoy my work, but doesn't get a bump from it at all.
Yeah.
So much of our life has nothing to do with it. We like to live in the quiet, but visit the noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to LA to make it without knowing what it was. And my it is balance. And I can achieve that here.
Let's switch gears for a second here, because a lot of what you do, not a lot, but what I understand, sorry. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, nor create anything that doesn't exist. You do a lot of corporate events, and you use your comedic talents, or you read the room, and you used a very Canadian, very, very Canadian metaphor that I found exquisite. You remember what you told me?
No.
No. You said you don't like to spray jokes. You like to get to know the audience a little bit more. You like to read the room, find out where the line is, and you boil everyone down like syrup so you can have everybody on board.
Oh, yeah, right.
Why? Why do you feel the need to level?
I think what I meant is the thing that I find really intriguing and satisfying about doing corporate hosting is that there is an audience of, sometimes it's 300 and sometimes it's 9,000, and they come from all different walks of life and different parts of America, and in some cases parts of the world. They have different religious beliefs. They have different cultural backgrounds and reference points. So trying to distill all that down into what do people find funny is an interesting challenge and social experiment. My conclusion over doing this for a long time is that silly and physical comedy is pretty universal. Not everybody gets or likes sophisticated wordplay. People sometimes have an allergic reaction to puns, but visual humor and physical stuff, silliness is what everyone can typically agree on.
Why do you like silly? Why is silly funny?
I guess it's harmless. It's a victimless crime. There was sort of the Jon Stewart era of cocked eyebrow, poking your subject with a stick because you're above it. Was very kind of 90s humor, maybe into the early 2000s. It's not mean. It's not mean. Will Ferrell is a great example of someone who is ridiculously funny, but it's never at someone's expense. He never pretends to be above it or beyond it. He's just in it.
What is really funny to you? Where is your sweet funny?
overconfident and underqualified. Every character I've played that I get really excited about that's the intersection.
Well, yeah, certainly your characters that you played are exactly that.
Yeah, and mountains out of molehills. I think it was in Meet the Fockers. Ben Stiller is trying to put his bag in the overhead bin, and the flight attendant suggests maybe he should put it under the seat in front of him, and he snaps and loses it. And same with Steve Martin in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Like the breaking point of the put upon but relatable everyman is a very funny thing to me.
There are two things there I see, right? Like, so silly, I agree with you. Silly is funny, but I think it's because I've just been a little boy before. Just like every other man, every other woman's been a little girl before. I mean, people know what silly is because they've been little. So I think there's a nostalgic funny in silly. And the underqualified, overconfident bit. So here's the question. Right before I say the question, I think that's also funny because we all have and we all know somebody in our circle, in our community, that is that, or that demonstrates those two qualities simultaneously. You said to me that that you enjoy, so you live a quiet life in the country, but your life is social, but your home is quiet. Is that those are the words you used? No.
Yeah, my work is social for sure.
There. And so you said social interaction with people in the community helps you fill up the well. What does that mean?
It means if you're going to play original characters that are representative of people that you encounter in the world, it helps if they are informed by actual interactions. The people that I've been exposed to that are celebrities of the highest order are kind of isolated, kind of lonely, and their universe revolves around themselves and their fame. But where I live, there's a guy who never wears a shirt. There's a guy who says the end of your sentence at the same time that you say them. There's someone who is always about to burp. Like those are little character things that you can drop in somewhere that sometimes you don't even really know where it came from. So I like having experiences like that. I also know, like, if you take a show like Trailer Park Boys, one of the things that's kind of much has been written about why it resonated so well, but I think at its core, it's because these people, by most standards, don't have much, but they're not feeling sorry for themselves and they're not begrudging the hands they've been dealt. They're just playing them. And there's a proud tradition in this part of the world to just do the best you can with what you have. And I relate to that. I would take that over a fancy dinner party any day of the week. I don't want to go out 4 nights a week to black tie events.
Well, you start your day shoveling shit.
Yeah, literally. We have horses, and the thing I like about the barn, and this was especially evident in the last couple of years when so much was different. Our lives were actually pretty similar. They're pretty the same. They didn't change a whole lot. We still shoveled shit every morning, went for a walk with the dogs, picked up the girls at school or did homeschool. But generally speaking, our lives didn't change a whole lot. And I think maybe the pandemic was like a fast forward button for people. And you realize, like, wait a sec, life is short. I don't like where I live. I don't like what I'm doing for a living. I don't like the person that I'm living with. Imagine if your life by design was I get up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym to get away from my partner, and I have drinks with the guys after work so I can just delay going home. Well, this past 2 years was kind of the squeeze play. And hopefully I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm hoping that people are coming out the other end of it with a renewed vigor and sense of urgency because time marches on quickly. And now is the time to do all those things you wanted to do. So I'm pretty content coming out the other side of this to think, well, I guess all the choices I made are genuinely what I'm happy with. It's funny, when Carol and I met, we would be watching something funny and I would say, that's funny. And I think it's because I was kind of analyzing the mechanics of the joke. But now I laugh because I'm happy.
Have you ever given thought of where or how you exist when you laugh?
What do you mean?
I don't know. I caught up with a friend of mine. So a very close friend of mine passed away 10 days ago. And it had
Sorry
me
to hear that.
Well, thank you. But I mentioned that because it brought a bunch of other people closer together who hadn't seen each other. So there was another close friend of mine. The three of us spent a lot of time. Actually, there were four of us. Spent a lot of time together in our early 20s, late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, and we laughed a lot. And he and I, this friend, let's call him Dan. We spent about an hour on the phone. We hadn't seen each other in years. And we picked up exactly where we left off. And we cried over our friend, obviously losing our friend. And we laughed hard. Like, I got off the phone. I told my wife, my stomach hurts. It was too much. It was too much.
It's the best.
Yeah. And I thought, when I was laughing, my stomach was not hurting while I was laughing. It was exhausted with laughing afterwards. But while I was laughing, where was I? Why? What is this thing that we call a laugh? This break in the conversation that we're enjoying ourselves. Where are we? That's why I ask.
I think that joy and pain, in the words of Rob Bass, are very tightly linked. And I think one is a release for the other. The day that John Dunsworth passed away, who was Mr. Leahy on Trailer Park Boys and a good friend and someone I looked up to and cared about a lot, Jeremy and I were on our book launch. And I was suddenly doing these morning shows on the morning after he had passed away. And people were asking repeatedly, what are you thinking about John this morning? What are your thoughts? Sorry to hear that you lost this person. Tell us about him. It was so heavy. And in the weirdest way, it feels good to be able to sit in it as it's happening and feel it instead of pretend it's not happening. There's no way around it. Got to go through it. So then Jeremy and I went to do this funny thing for CBC radio, and we were weeping with laughter. And it's not that anything that was happening was so funny. I think we just had to lance the boil of tension and coat ourselves with the sweet sebum of a page turn, because it's like when it pours and then the sun comes out. Like, not those emotions are so heightened, they can't be sustained. And I think we're wired physiologically to relieve ourselves from the weight.
Wow, that's wonderfully put. Where or how do you exist when you're writing? Because you've written a lot for the shows that you've been on and shows that you haven't been on. When you are gathering from that well and you're in the act of writing, how do you exist?
My challenge is I'm very micro. I'm very interested in specific jokes and specific moments. And the real challenge of writing is the macro, the structure, the architecture of the story, making sure that one domino naturally dovetails into the next one. So I've learned this about myself and surround myself with people who are better at the math of story so that I can just concentrate on jokes. My practical challenge is distractions. And I remember saying to my wife when the girls were little, this is so great. I'm home, I'm working, but I can help. And she said, I'm going to stop you there. You're probably not doing either of those things to the best of your ability. When you're here, be here. But we know you have to work, go to work, it's fine. But then when you're here, be here. And one of the challenges as a freelancer and in the last few years for everyone with work from home is, when does work stop and life begin? And you and I were talking about this, how despite being aware of it and our best efforts, I can have everyone I need in the world in a 6-foot radius. And somehow I'm doing this, scrolling on Facebook, and have to give myself a wait a sec. What are you doing? What is the point of this? So my wife and I were talking about this morning. My approach to social media now is it's the post office. I go there to send messages out, but I don't go there to receive anything.
Or to hang
and
out
if
for
I
coffee.
see it as a tool that I can use, exactly. If I see it as a tool I can use in that regard, it's great. So I, practically speaking, delete social media apps from my phone, log out every time. So it's a pain in the ass to check it. So instead, I'll stay focused on my work. And as my wife said, when you're here, be here. But when you're at work, it's fine, be at work. If I know I've carved out 9 to 1 to work, then I actually have to make it count. I used to think writing was kind of a romantic notion. And if you bolted up right in the middle of the night, then that's when the genius strikes. You have to indulge it. Life begs to differ. And I need to get up in the morning to drive the girls to school, and I need to be present as a dad and as a husband.
Mhm.
So work expands to the time allotted for it. If I had 3 weeks, it would take 3 weeks. If I have 4 hours, somehow it gets done every time.
You have a rule of 3.
Yes, with the jobs that I take, fun, money, challenge. Any gig has to have 2 of them. The very rare time you get all 3, and those are the lightning in a bottle things that you want to wish would go on forever.
Where did you have those 3?
I've been really lucky the last couple of years. Sylvia, my partner in the production company, and I have been making TV shows in Truro, where I live, with a wonderful network and executive who encourages us and gives us a lot of freedom. Get to hire my friends, get to make up jokes and sleep in my own bed. So they're smaller paychecks, but more of them because I direct and produce and perform, and cobbled together, it equals a pretty great existence. So recently, now I would say.
That's wonderful. You're coming into your own.
But the fun challenge ones, when the money's not good, have historically been the best opportunities for growth, because it means playing a character I haven't played before, getting to work with someone that I haven't, but have always looked up to. Like, been working long enough that I don't have many mentors or idols that I can learn from. So it's always a treat to work with someone who's done it better, longer, more.
You know, that's also great advice to my younger self too, because if I take the I call them rule of 3. Is that what you've called them?
My fun money challenge.
Yeah. Did you give it a name? Because I just called it rule of 3.
Someone called it the Torrens trifecta.
Okay, so the TT.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time being handcuffed by a good salary, not having fun, and not even caring about the challenge because I wasn't having fun. And I spent a few years more than I should have, because I didn't leave that dichotomy. I think that's something, on a personal basis. I think that's something that's advice I'm going to give my kids. Is if the money's not there and it's fun and challenging, go with it, because that's where what you said. You did a lot of growth. I mean, that's what you want. You want to have that basis. You want to have that basis where years later you can laugh really hard because you've had the experience. You've had that experience laughing 15 years prior, 20 years prior. I don't know if I'm.
Well, it's the tail wagging the dog too. I live in a part of the world where the cost of living is in theory less than it would be if I was trying to pay for a big pad in Toronto. With our production company, we don't have a, an office overlooking the Halifax Harbor with the marble boardroom and 8 people on staff that we're trying to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is piecemeal, because if you have a big overhead and roll with a big nut, then what's serving your creative decisions is how can we make the most money in the shortest amount of time possible, because we've already committed to spending this money. So my approach is that more money doesn't mean more funny. I hire the very best person for the job at their very best day rate. I never haggle on people's rates, never try to beat them down, never call in favors at this stage. I just don't have more people than I need. Which as a result means everyone who's there feels well paid, valued, happy to be there. But it's a small, nimble crew, and we can accomplish a lot in a short period of time. One of the things that bothers me in my business is the lack of efficiency. So if you're doing half a page in a coffee shop in the morning and then 1 page at a funeral home in the afternoon, you lose 3 hours on a big show just with the trucks driving across town.
Mm-hmm.
But no one watching the movie is going to be like, oh, I bet they had a big unit move between those 2 scenes, and that's why they didn't get as many takes as they probably needed to nail the scene. Sure. Like that stuff doesn't, it's just ego. It's just ego. So same with, if I'm doing a corporate gig, I don't care about first class. I don't care about a limo picking me up at the airport. Just pay me my rate and I'll be there. It's the Christopher Walken approach. By the way, apparently if you can come up with $100,000, Christopher Walken will say yes.
No kidding, to anything.
Yeah.
Like Deer Hunter style, I always forget, roulette. Yeah. Speaking of doing anything creative output, I forgot to mention that Jeremy Taggart, who's been on the show, introduced us. Sweet guy. Yeah. A really fun conversation. And you have a podcast with him. Why? Why are you doing it? Why this podcast with him?
It's kind of the odd couple. We're similar in that we both started on our professional path as teenagers, but we're different in that he was opening for Van Halen as an 18-year-old, and I was shooting stories about why there's so much air in chip bags. So we have different frames of reference for what has kind of been the same journey. We're both family people now. One of the reasons that I wanted to do a podcast is because you might tape an episode of Letterkenny and it comes out a year later. And I like the immediacy of, we put out an episode Monday evening and we have emails and tweets and letters and don't do that again. I wish you guys would do this again. Remember when you did this last time? Can you do that sometime? I really was yearning for the immediacy that this medium can bring. Interesting lesson was, I was trying to produce it. We'll have a top 5 list, and then we'll have a guest, and then we'll play a game, and then we'll have spontaneous fun. But it was when the wheels came off the bus and we just started pursuing these flights of fancy and talking about real things as dads and kids of aging parents and people losing pets. That is what really resonated with people. And in this LOL emoji universe, as you know, there aren't many outlets for long form conversation.
I would agree with you. Yes. Going with the fluidity of life. So a couple more questions. Do you get bored? And if yes, what do you do when you're bored?
I'm lucky that what I do for a living and what I love are the same thing. Mm-hmm. So if I'm home and I'm playing my guitar, and that might become a theme song for a piece that we're doing for a web series that we're making, or I am writing a sketch or practicing an accent or playing improv games with my girls, which is something that we like to do. We loved homeschool. It was really fun during the pandemic when things were closed down. I was the kind of cartoonish gym teacher who had the hots for the hot principal. Like I had a whole backstory to my character as a homeschool teacher, which was really fun. So I would say I don't get bored. There's lots of things to do with our property, and yeah, I'm never bored. My mind is a very busy place.
Well, is busy playing a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fun. My father-in-law, who's a very practical, pragmatic guy, we're very good friends. I think because we're very different and not a threat to each other and have enormous respect. He was in the farm machinery business for years and gave great customer service and knows a lot. But he says to me sometimes, instead of doing 10 things half-assed, why don't you pick 2 or 3 and go hard at them? And I think that's great advice because I can get my head spun around by shiny things. For example, there was a motel for sale on Prince Edward Island a couple of years ago, and it was very affordable and it wasn't selling. It was 10 rooms and a couple of cottages, and it was in a good touristy part of the world. And I kind of broached this with him, like, wouldn't that be cool? And he said, do you want to be standing behind the counter at 10 at night when Don and Diane's flight from Winnipeg was delayed, waiting to give them a set of keys before you can go home? Like, right. No, I don't. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I've been trying to give how I spend my time the same consideration I give how I spend my money, which is in fact more important to think about.
Very good advice.
So I'm trying to be selective. And as a freelancer, it's fundamentally strange to say no to anything, but I've been really trying to say no to most things.
Last question. What is greatness to you?
Wow, it's a word that has so many meanings. I know for me personally, what I would aspire to is that at the end, people say he always did what he said he would do. I think that is a pretty great legacy. Friend of mine says, anytime you share a good deed that you've done, it diminishes the goodness of the deed by 50%. So I've really had that in my head a lot lately and been trying to quietly do things to make people's lives better without grandstanding or feeling the need to tweet about it or share. I think, again, John Dunsworth, Mr. Leahy from Trailer Park Boys, after he passed away, people came out of the woodwork and said, he paid for my tuition. He paid our rent when I was struggling. He hired me when I couldn't find work. He gave me $50 when I didn't have money for dinner. And no one knew. And all these seeds of kindness that he planted throughout his life were watered with time. And to me, that's greatness.
I would agree. I would agree with that. And it'd be wonderful to know whether those people actually paid it to others just the same way.
Imagine the difference that would make in the world.
Oh,
it's like I just love the idea that he was there for the setup and didn't care about the punchline. It's not about that. I don't need to be there when I get kudos for it. It's almost Littlest Hobo like. I'm going to make the world better, this part of the universe better, and then just leave. How cool is that?
Very. Did you say Littlest Hobo? And now I have that song in my head.
Yeah.
All day long now. I know it.
The Canadian national anthem.
Jonathan, it's been a slice, man. Really, thank you. Thank you for this.
I appreciate it. You're such a great interviewer and you ask very thoughtful questions. And best of all, you listen. A rare commodity these days.
Well, thank you. And it was a pleasure to have you here.
Look at you taking a compliment.
See, I'm learning.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today? There's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.